well, they don't look autistic. Oh, if you are a parent of a child who has autism or is on the pathway being assessed for autism, you've probably heard that more than once. Hands up if that's true. I know it's true for me, and it can be so frustrating. So incredibly frustrating when someone in your life that probably knows very little about autism and has probably never met anyone that they're aware of that has autism, and these preconceived ideas are coming from some film they saw once or someone on TV with these stereotypes. Basically, they think that they are correct, and you, the person who lives with your child and knows all about them and sees them behind closed doors and actually is witness to the meltdowns that happen behind closed doors after all day masking, and you, the person that has probably really educated yourself about autism and learnt a lot about it since perhaps your child's teacher or health visitor or whoever first pointed out, you know what, we might be dealing with autism here. You probably threw yourself right into the research, learnt all about it, and yet this family member that's going, hey, they don't look autistic, they're clearly right, aren't they? And you're wrong. Apparently, that seems to be an experience that a lot of parents of children who have autism experience, sadly. So today on the Real Talk with Rhi podcast, we are going to discuss this problem that so many of us have faced. We're going to discuss why it happens and perhaps discuss some of the differences in people with autism, and maybe it'd be helpful for you to send this episode to someone in life that previously has just not got it at all. Let's share it around so we can increase a little bit of the awareness that autism is in fact a spectrum. It's right in the name. It's ASD, it's autism spectrum disorder, because it is a spectrum, and no two people with autism are the same, and they're not going to have the same challenges, and they're certainly not going to look or act the same way. And just because they don't look like they have autism doesn't mean they don't. If you're new here, hi, I am Rhi. Welcome back to the Real Talk with Rhi podcast. I am a mum of 4 children. They all have autism, and they're all quite different. They are all quite different. And I've got to say, not one of them conforms to even what I, before I kind of embarked upon this journey of motherhood and parenting children with autism, thought autism was. So I think we have to have a little bit of empathy for people that don't actually know any better, because at one stage I was one of those people. I don't think I was outwardly said some of the stuff that has been said to me. In fact, I know I wouldn't have done, but I know I was definitely naive enough to not understand autism the way I do now, which is understandable. I mean, I was born in the 80s, I grew up in the 90s, and I knew of precisely one person that was diagnosed with autism who was completely nonverbal, needed around-the-clock one-to-one care. So therefore, that's what I thought autism was. And I think this is quite a common phenomenon. So people maybe have seen, let's see what gets brought up a lot, Rain Man, or there are a few others, aren't there? A few other television. There's the one, The Good Doctor, where he, perhaps in his mannerisms, the character, the Good Doctor, is very, very, very intelligent and is quite obviously has difficulties with interpersonal connections and communication. But not all people with autism, it's not always obvious they have autism. And I'm going to chat a little bit about the experiences we've had within our family and the differences that each of my children have, and some of the things that you would have thought they'd struggle with because they have autism that they just don't, and some of the things that you'd be like, why would they struggle with that? And they really do. So let's dive into that. Before we do, if you are watching here on YouTube, hello, thank you for being part of the community. If you are listening on the podcast, apologies, you won't be able to do this, but you can head over to the YouTube channel, just type Real Talk with Rhi into your YouTube, subscribe to the channel for me, and let's share the knowledge around in the comments. Let me know if you have children on the spectrum, where you are on the assessment journey, and if you have experienced this level of difficulty, because it's horrible that other people have had to experience it too, but equally, I think it's comforting to know that we're not alone. So it's not that I want any of you to ever had to experience this, but I think it is nice if as a community we can kind of go, yeah, I've actually faced these judgments from family members, even from teachers, from friends, and these comments like, oh, they don't look autistic, there's nothing wrong with them, I don't know what you're fussing about. I've never seen any of that, so therefore it can't possibly be true. And it's like, well, if you should see behind closed doors, which obviously it's good that your children are comfortable enough with you to be able to have those meltdowns with you, and it's good that you are their safe space, but it can cause this massive difficulty in understanding between the people out in the wider world when you're saying, hey, do you know what, they're having these struggles, we're having these challenges, and people going, hey, I just don't see it. So we're going to talk all about that today. So autism is a spectrum. We've touched on this briefly, and that means that the range of difficulties can vary quite dramatically. Like I said, some people are totally non-verbal, and some people, to talk to them, you would never guess. You'd just never guess that they have autism. And some of this is to do with whether they have any other challenges or difficulties that go along with autism. Some of it can be to do with when they were diagnosed and whether they had any early intervention. I honestly believe that early intervention is absolutely game-changing, and I'm not saying that if things haven't been picked up till later it's not worth picking up, because that's absolutely not true. But I just believe that if as soon as we have our concerns about our children, we act on those concerns as soon as possible, and then we find out as early as possible whether they need extra support or not, we can then parent those children and get them the help that they need. And the younger we can do that with them, the easier their lives are going to be. And ultimately, the easier our lives are going to be as parents, because there's this whole element before your child is assessed and diagnosed where you're like, is it this? Or are they just, am I causing this? I've had people say that to me. You're making them like that. You're causing this. Specifically family members who are no longer in communication with us. But yeah, I've had people say that to me. And then you doubt yourself. You doubt yourself like crazy. Like, am I causing this? Have I, is this just a problem I caused myself? Is this my parenting? And by having that assessment and that diagnosis, you stop second guessing yourself so much. You stop questioning it. But sadly, it doesn't mean other people are going to stop questioning it. It just doesn't. So I think some of the stereotypes that we see online or in films, the perception of autism is someone that is incredibly, incredibly blunt, that has no empathy, that is almost quite robotic, and makes no eye contact at all. Now, in my experience, my children have all got very different struggles, very different strengths and things they find easy, and very different challenges. They were all diagnosed at slightly different ages and in different orders. And I have talked about, I've got another episode where I talk in depth about when our second child, who was our first child to be diagnosed, I went through that in depth. Let me know if you'd like to hear in-depth episodes about the stories from the other children, if you found that one helpful. I will happily share those. I would like it noted that I am always aware that my children are very unlikely to watch this now. They might, but they're unlikely to. They may watch anything that I put out on the internet as they get older. And I do always have that in the back of my mind. I have this awareness that they might watch these podcast episodes, YouTube videos, anything. And I would only share things that I think they'd be comfortable with me sharing. I don't go into big details about certain things, and I never would film them having meltdowns or anything like that. The reason I share this stuff is because I genuinely believe that if we can make the world a more understanding place, it will be a better place for them as they grow up. And autism to me, and this is the way I've explained it to the children, autism is a list of challenges that your child is likely to face. And when you get your child assessed, they are likely to give you a quite specific list of challenges that your specific child faces when you go through the ADOS or the BOSA, which is the other type of assessment. I have got a whole podcast episode where I talked about those in depth. So if you want to know exactly what goes on inside those, what's the difference, which one your child might have, which one my children had, then please go and check out that episode. It's also on the channel. But basically, at the end of those assessments, I was given a very specific list of specific challenges that my children were likely to face, and each of them had different challenges because it is a spectrum and they do not all struggle with the same things. And ultimately, as they've grown up, although autism is not something to be cured or something that goes away, it is something that the challenges can shift and change, and we're going to go into that now to explain what I mean by that. So let's start with Will, who, with hindsight, of the 4 children, when he was little, not so much now at all, due to early intervention and all the things, but he was the most obvious. If I could teleport back in time and see him in front of me now, of the 4 children, he's the one I'd be like, yeah, this seems obvious enough autism here, in that he did not like communicating with anyone other than me. He didn't make eye contact back then. He had very specific, he went through phases of hating wrapping paper and just really hating it. So I guess that's a sensory thing. He would only wear very specific shoes. He hated having his feet measured, hated having new shoes. Again, sensory thing. So back then, when he was very little, we're talking preschool age, he seemed the most obvious of the 4 of them, which I think if Will hadn't been picked up, assessed and diagnosed, I'm going to be honest, I'm not sure I would have noticed it in any, excuse me, that's my stomach rumbling. I'm not sure I would have noticed in any of my other children. With our eldest, his behaviour when he was little, he did some things I couldn't explain. But having grown up with sisters, I was just like, wow, I love you, but boys are weird. And that was my thing. I was like, wow, I don't know anything about boys. And you're doing these things. I'm guessing that's because you're a boy. And that's genuinely what I thought it was. I don't know. Let me know. Have you got neurotypical boys and girls? And are they indeed very different from each other? Or is it just, I guess my parenting expertise, my parenting experience is limited to children on the spectrum. So I can't generalize this to neurotypical children. I'd be genuinely curious to hear if you have neurotypical boys and girls and if they are indeed from Mars and Venus, or if they are perhaps a little more similar. But his, let's say, his challenging behaviour I just put down to being a boy. So thanks to Will being a little more obvious at the time, even though now he probably has the least obvious autism challenges. I learned more about it, and then I learned more about autism in girls, and then even though everyone were like, with Bella, who is our 3rd child, eldest daughter, was like, no, you're seeing things, you're just, even the teachers in school with lots of expertise in autism thought I was just seeing things. I was just seeing autism everywhere. And then when I pushed and I got her assessed and it turns out I was right, everyone was shocked. Including me. Everyone was a bit shocked. But I'm so glad I did. Anyway, let's talk about some differences. Let's talk about some big differences. So Will, for example, used to have these massive sensory issues. He was really funny with his food. So he was amazing at eating. Baby-led weaning, literally ate everything. Then he went through this phase of eating this really specific, very, very healthy, but very rigid, same breakfast, same lunch, same dinner, every day. If I did not feed him that food, he would not eat every single day. And now he's the most adventurous eater out of the whole family. He will try anything. My grandfather, who he's named after, who I miss terribly, he passed away after Dylan was born, but before Will. So hence why William's named after him. And he has the same blue eyes as my grandfather. And my grandfather, whose motto was, I'll try anything twice, and literally tried everything food-wise, compared to my grandmother, who was the plainest eater in the world. Will's turned into him. And that's just lovely. And it's such a joy to see William eating so many different varieties of food when he was just so rigid with it. And it was such a challenge. You hear of fuss eaters, there's fuss eating, and then I was just at the stage where I was like, darling, will you please just eat chips? Because I was getting range anxiety from the house. Because if I left the house without his specific food, we had to get back by mealtime or he would starve. So, it was a really, really big challenge. And now it's just not something he struggles with. Sensory stuff. If you've seen recent vlogs on my main channel, Mummy of Four, the sensory stuff just doesn't seem to bother him. So he loves roller coasters. Maybe in a sense a sensory thing, I don't know. He loves roller coasters, so he's not bothered by like the being chucked around. He's not bothered by loud noises. He used to be really funny more about which shoes and labels and things. He is not nearly as bothered by that stuff as the girls, or actually Dylan, our eldest, is far more bothered by sensory stuff now, far more. But just the sensory stuff, not so much. It doesn't mean he doesn't struggle. So we went into scare mazes when we went to Alton Towers, which I've got to admit were flipping terrifying, okay? They're designed from a multi-sensory point of view to absolutely terrify you. There are the smells, the noises, the flashing light, all of it designed to terrify you. And I mean, go and watch the vlogs if you want to see what I mean, but just search Mummy of Four Alton Towers Scarefest and the vlogs will come out on YouTube. And they were terrifying. But I was actually talking to Will. So we're standing in the queue for one of the scare mazes. We'd been into a couple of them and we were going into another one. And I was talking to him. I was like, the girls would hate this, they'd really hate it. Because although they didn't used to be as bothered by sensory stuff, Zara very much is now and uses ear defenders more and more. And Bella seems to be becoming a little more bothered by the sort of lights and sound stuff. Both of the girls have always been a lot more fussy with like things they're wearing, the textures of things they're wearing. Can't have a label that's itchy, that kind of thing. That really, really bothers them. But Will is a little more chill and unbothered by that stuff. So anyway, we're standing in this queue for this scare maze. And I said, the girls would hate this, wouldn't they? He's like, yeah, they'd hate this. It's like the smells and the noises and the flashing, the strobing. And I said, but you just don't seem bothered by it. He's like, honestly, I'm not. I said to him, but the thing is, if you think we're running late for something you want to do, and he replies, the world is ending. And that's how it feels to him. So especially, I think we were referring to a time earlier that day, we had been getting ready to go into Alton Towers and he thought we were going to be late for this schedule that he'd set up where we want to be here and then we'd be here. And so he likes, and they very much, all of my children are like this. They like to know what's going to happen first and then what's going to happen there. And then have they got the thing they need for this? And routine is very important to all of them, which is why we do a lot of planning, which is why I said to them, once before, I said, so many people, they do like surprise Disney trips for their kids. Bear in mind, if you've seen, I've got a whole Disney channel. It's called Mummy of Four Does Disney. Check it out on YouTube if you love Disney. And I share like all the magic of Disney plus planning tips and stuff, plus autism friendly tips. Anyway, so I said so many parents do these surprise Disney trips for their kids. And I said, I'm not, would you like that? Like, is that something you, and they said, what, you mean just like pick us up from school and be like, we're going now? And all three of them went, no, do not do that. I was like, so even if we were going to Disney, they're like, no, don't do that to me. No. Which most kids you'd think would be like, amazing. But no. And I knew they'd say that before they answered that. And this is why I involve them so much in the planning, which is why I do so much planning, which is why I've got, trip planners and things. And the planning is to make sure the children are happy with what's going to happen. It also extends the magic. It's kind of nice because then it drags it out. But also I know, like, some people pack the night before and they'll pack things. And if something isn't clean, they'll pack something else. I know that wouldn't work for my children because I know that if we got somewhere and they didn't have a certain thing that they needed, then there'd be meltdowns and that would spoil the trip, for everybody. I was talking to my best friend before and she said, so we were talking about breakfast and about how I always have this method of like stock control of having one to use and one's a backup. So we don't run out of stuff because when we run out of stuff, people have meltdowns. And she's like, wow, that must be really hard. It's like, oh, well, why? What do your children do? Like if you run out of the cereal they're expecting? She's like, well, they just have toast or they just have something else. I'm like, hold the phone. If you haven't got something, they just have something else. The end? That's it? She's like, yeah. Oh. So I didn't realise that was the case for other people. I think you just assume your own situation is everyone's situation. But I think this is some of the stuff that people don't see, because that is a meltdown that would happen at home, in the privacy of our own home. It is not something that teachers would see. It's not something friends and family would see. It's not something elderly relatives would see. And I think elderly relatives can be one of the most challenging customers when it comes to understanding autism and things. I know two of our elderly relatives who are no longer with us, they passed away, when William was diagnosed, were really upset. You'd have sworn that I'd told them that he had cancer, not autism. Like the way they reacted, the amount of upset that they had. And it's just a lack of understanding. I think it's a lack of understanding, lack of education. And don't get me wrong, I think there is this element of grief and kids. You've heard me talk about this before if you're watching in the future. It's not about being sad that someone has autism. The overwhelming feeling that as a parent I felt, the tears I cried the days that they were diagnosed, were largely because it was the end of a big old fight and a battle. And I think so many parents have experienced this. I think it's almost like a release of, oh my goodness, someone listened to me. Oh my goodness, I pushed for this. And it's not that you wanted them to be diagnosed, but you did want them to be assessed, and you did want to make sure that you or children were seen and heard, and that the assessment was carried out properly. You didn't want anything to be missed. I think a concern I had before my children were assessed was that maybe they wouldn't, that's my stomach rumbling again, sorry, they wouldn't display enough autism on the day, and they would need a diagnosis, but they wouldn't get a diagnosis. And I think, having been through the assessment process, excuse me, with the children now, I acknowledge that that's unlikely to happen. I think it's in depth enough, and I went over that in my autism assessment episode that I did recently, about the detail that they go into. So I no longer have that concern that if your child gets to the assessment stage, that if they needed a diagnosis, they wouldn't get one, nor do I have any concerns that someone would be wrongly diagnosed. I know that there is a lot of thinning out that happens through the pre-assessment process, and I think a lot of children that perhaps need an assessment end up getting taken out of that pathway just because the pathway is overloaded. And I think anywhere that things can be thinned out, if children are not an obvious problem, specifically in school, then I think a lot of children that perhaps could do with being assessed are not, and that is a problem. So I think a lot of the tears that people shed when the children are diagnosed, it's just the end of that release. And I think the other thing is that you're given a list of the things that your children are going to struggle with. And when your babies are born, they're just these precious little bundles, and you want to wrap them up in cotton wool, and you want everything in their lives to be totally perfect, and you never want them to ever so much as get a cold or a sniffle. You don't want anyone to ever be mean to them. You don't want them to have one single challenge in their whole lives. And that's what we want for our children. But unfortunately, that's not super practical. Excuse me. I have a very scratchy throat. I'm still recovering from some dreaded leggy. So we don't want our children to ever struggle with anything ever. And that's not practical. And most children who are neurotypical or have not yet been assessed or diagnosed, the parents are not handed a list of these are the struggles your children are going to have. Those struggles are going to be a surprise for some point in the future. And I think being told that your child is going to struggle with anything at all is upsetting. It's upsetting. And that's, I think, why parents shed tears. But how I've explained it to the children is everyone struggles with something. Some people really struggle with maths. Some people really struggle with spelling. Some people really struggle with, reverse parking, spatial awareness. Mine's rubbish. Some people are just terribly shy. But there's no actual support for that. And autism is just a list of difficulties that you are likely to have. The problem is, I think, is that the list of difficulties that each person with autism has that's given to them on their list from the consultant, when they're assessed, is totally different. And it's almost like it should be subcategorized into lots of different difficulties in order for more people to understand it. But honestly, there's so many varieties of it. I don't know how they do that. So I get why they don't do that. But from an understanding point of view from the general population, that's why people say they don't look autistic. It's because maybe they are making eye contact. if you take empathy, for example, marginally entertaining story, I suppose. We were in Alton Towers, and by the end of the day, the insole of one of my shoes was kind of coming out, and it was bunching up under my foot. And the difference in reactions to my children, every few steps, it's like, oh, I'm really sorry, guys. Mummy's got to stop and fix her shoe. It's really hurting. Bella's like, oh, Mummy, it's okay. Don't worry. Bella kind of almost goes the other way and is very concerned about everybody. And I know a few girls with autism specifically like this, like almost too tuned into it. And then by contrast, Will's like, you'll be okay, Mummy. Just push through. Just push through, okay? Just push through. You'll be fine. Just get used to it. You'll be fine. And then by the end of the day, I'd been feeling really unwell, and it was kind of coming back, and I felt quite nauseous. We had 3 roller coasters left to do on the list. I had Bella looking at me going, Mummy, are you okay? You don't look good. You don't look well. It's not. And she's like, oh, it's not that I want to say you don't look good, but you just don't look well. And then Will's going, she's fine. It's like the difference in them, such a big difference in how they kind of dealt with that situation. It was quite entertaining. But they have these different challenges. So the girls never would have coped with the scare mazes. Will was fine. Bella's better at being tuned in to how I was feeling, and Will obviously struggled to notice that because he was a little bit like laser focused on what he wanted to get done. They all struggle when things are not going to plan, when things are not going to routine, and if there's a long wait for something. They all struggle with that. They all struggle at different levels in very crowded spaces. So if it's very crowded and they're expecting it, then maybe one of them would struggle. Another one of them would struggle every time in that situation. And just crowds in general. Funnily enough, my husband hates crowds, like absolutely hates them. So he's probably the worst of all of them. And it's just funny. Funny's the wrong word. Interesting, I suppose, how it is just this one word or these 3 little letters, and each of them has challenges, and some of them have overlapping challenges, but none of them face the challenges in the same way. They all struggle with different elements of the challenges in a different way. So just because someone doesn't look autistic, it doesn't mean they are not. And it doesn't mean they don't struggle. And not all disabilities are visible. And I think the world would be a much kinder place if we could all understand that. Now, you're probably going to want to know a bit more about the autism assessment and what is involved in that. And if you do want to know that, then click on that video that is on the screen now. And if you're listening, then you can just search back on your podcast episode thing. But don't forget to subscribe to the channel and grab the printable, which I'll link down below, and check out my Patreon, some early release videos. I'll see you guys very, very soon in the next one. Bye.